Welcome back, my fellow travellers of history. Now, at the edge of the known world, more than 2,000 miles from the nearest continent, lies a small triangle of volcanic rocks, a place the Polynesians called Rapa Nui. However, the rest of the world, we know it as Easter Island. Here, hundreds of colossal stone faces stare silently toward the island's heart, their expressions unchanging. However, their presence is ever eternal. This is a story that we think we know, a cautionary tale of collapse and isolation. But beneath the textbook version lies something more complex, more human, and maybe a little bit more haunting. Because Easter Island didn't just fall, it's a testament to a civilization that has vanished. According to the standard story, Polynesian settlers arrived here around 1200 CE after voyaging thousands of miles across the Pacific. They brought crops, chickens, and a deep tradition of ancestor veneration. Over time, the population flourished. Forests grew thick with the now extinct Rapa Nui palm. The people carved vast statues. These are what they call the Moai, to honour their ancestors and their chiefs. Each figure could weigh over 80 tons. These are carved from volcanic tuff and transported to the coast. But the story continues. This triumph was short-lived. As trees were felled to move the statues, the island's ecosystem began to collapse. Without trees, soil eroded, crops failed, river clans went to war, the statues were toppled, and cannibalism supposedly followed. By the time the Europeans arrived, so the story goes, Easter Island was barren and broken, a monument to human error etched in the land. Now that's the version that's printed in the old textbooks. But the island itself tells another story. They claim that many of the Moai were toppled, but they weren't, they were buried. And beneath the ground, archaeologists have found their full bodies still standing, perfectly preserved, complete with intricate carvings. The image of total destruction doesn't seem to hold up, nor does the idea that the Rapa Nui people vanished overnight. In truth, their descendants are still here. They survived, adapted, and carried their traditions forward. You see, when the Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen landed in 1722, he didn't find a barren wasteland. His crew described the island as exceptionally fertile, with rich soil and thriving crops. The Rapa Nui were fishing from reed boats and tending gardens, signs not of a collapse but of adaptation. The later image of a desolate, ruined island seems to be a European myth that came much later, one that said more about the colonizers than the islanders themselves. Modern archaeologists working also revealed that the island's deforestation wasn't exactly entirely human-made. The evidence seems to point towards the Polynesian rat, which was brought on accidentally by settlers, devoured all of the palm seeds faster than the trees could regrow. So while human activity contributed, the ecological changes were far more complex than they cut down too many trees. And what about the so-called civil war that's claimed? There's almost no archaeological evidence of a massive conflict or widespread cannibalism. Those tales may have been exaggerated or even invented. by 19th century European visitors who sought to justify their colonial dominance. So in the 2000s, archaeologists Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo re-examined the island's story. Their research challenged the old ecocide theory, suggesting that the Rapa Nui people managed their resources more sustainably than once believed, creating rock gardens, maintaining soil, and adapting to the deforestation. They didn't deny that the island faced hardships or even ecological strain, but they argued that this was not a total collapse. The truth is, as they proposed, lies somewhere between destruction and endurance, a society under pressure, yet still very much adapting. So, the real devastation didn't come from within, but from outside. When European explorers and slavers arrived, they brought disease, abductions, and colonial exploitation. So what happened in Rapa Nui echoes a far greater tragedy that seems to have unfolded across the oceans. The pattern seen in the New World when the Europeans' contact unleashed a wave of disease and death among the Native American people. Smallpox, measles, influenza, invisible conquerors that ravaged entire civilizations before a single battle was fought. On Easter Island, as in the Americas, the arrival of the outsiders marked the beginning of a new kind of collapse. Not one born of overreach, but of invasion. By the late 1800s, the population had dropped from thousands to just over 100 survivors. Not because they cut down the trees, and not because they took away their own world. So, what does mainstream archaeology today say? Most researchers agree on several key points. The Polynesians settled the island between 1150 and 1250 CE. They built over 900 Moai, representing deified ancestors, positioned to maintain spiritual and social harmony. The statues were transported not by rolling on logs, but by a walking method, using ropes to rock them side by side, step by step, as demonstrated by modern experiments. Deforestation happened gradually due to both human use and the ecological impact of rats. The population likely peaked around 15,000, then declined somewhat before the European contact. But this was all without a dramatic, catastrophic collapse. And most importantly, the cultural system persisted right up until European colonization. And even after, in fragments, Rapa Nui wasn't a failed society. It was an isolated society that survived longer than most would have believed possible. Most Moai were placed on ahu, which are kind of like ceremonial stone platforms, many of which stand along the coast. They generally face inland towards the villages, symbolically watching over the living. But this was not a universal rule. Some ahu are inland, others face different directions, each shaped by the needs and the stories of the clans who built them. What matters was not the orientation itself, but the connection between the people and their ancestors. A gaze etched into stone to last across generations. The island's silence isn't a sign of ruin, it's the echo of endurance. Now, of course, any great mystery attracts stories, some grounded in evidence, others not so much and more grounded in imagination. So what we're going to do, we're going to explore 4 different conspiracy-esque theories And this isn't to endorse them, but it's just to understand why they persist. Now, some researchers believe that the Moai may align with celestial patterns, solstices, lunar circles, or specific star clusters. Whilst most archaeologists view this as speculative, there's no denying that the Polynesian cultures were master astronomers. They navigated across the Pacific over 2,000 miles and relied on reading stars, swells, and even wind, a science perhaps cloaked in myth. Others note the precision of these statues and question how such enormous monoliths were moved without wheels, metal, or even beasts of burden. Experimental archaeology shows it is possible, but for some, the craftsmanship hints at techniques we no longer understand. Now, there's also a fringe layer of thinkers that link Easter Island to the myth of Atlantis, suggesting it could have been a surviving outpost of a prehistoric maritime civilization. There's no real evidence for this, but the idea endures, partly because the Moai seem timeless, out of step with the known world. And then there are the so-called ancient alien theories, that these statues represent extraterrestrial beings, or that the Rapa Nui people were aided by visitors from the sky. Now, there's no data to support this, yet the myth persists. Perhaps because humans have always projected divinity onto what we cannot explain. But the truth seems to be more moving than any conspiracy theory ever could. These statues weren't built by gods, and in the Rapa Nui worldview, the gods weren't distant beings in the sky. They were their ancestors, standing eternally amongst them. Today, there are some descendants of the Rapa Nui, and they're reclaiming their history, challenging the myths of collapse and rediscovering the sophistication of their ancestors. Archaeologists too are reframing the narrative, not a warning of destruction, but a lesson in adaptation and resilience. Because Easter Island's people didn't vanish, they endured slavery, colonization, and isolation, and yet they still stand, just like their statues. So, in the end, Easter Island may not be the story of how people destroyed their own world, but how they kept it alive against all odds. Their statues, those solemn faces carved from stone, don't look out to the sea in longing, they look inwards, watching over the land and the living, the past, and perhaps even the future. Now, if you've enjoyed exploring the real story of Easter Island with me, leave me a like and share this episode to help more people rediscover the ancient world. Any form of engagement, a like, comment, subscribe, really does help me in the algorithm. So thank you very much for all of your support. Until next time, take care.